Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
And here we are for episode 78 of the MMA Outsiders. We welcome you all once again to this weekly fun of chatting things up about what's going on in the MMA world. Tom Albano here along with Zain Bando. Little spoiler reviews because you never really see him on stage, but producer Pat not with us this week. Producer Pat over in San Antonio right now, getting ready for the PFL to open its regular season.
Yeah, just wanted to give Pat a quick shout out. Whenever he's always on the road, he always does good work. So stay tuned to all of his socials to see all the great content he's going to do both for us and for Combat Sports UK. And it's definitely fun to see him on the road covering such a big event like PFL San Antonio. And speaking of PFL, I will be covering PFL's third event when PFL comes to Chicago on Friday, April 19th, back at the Wintrust Arena. So stay tuned for all of that and so much more.
Zain, it's nuts because sorry if I scared you, but like PFL. I mean, Pat's going to be in San Antonio for PFL this week. Hopefully, we get some PFL stuff like video junkets up with that. You're going to be in Chicago a couple weeks. I'm hoping to get to one of their cards at some point this season if they manage to come back to the Northeast. Like this is a really fun time. Like we've talked about last week, how fun a time we have with Bellator. We're gonna have a fun time with PFL now that they and Bellator are essentially joined forces.
For sure. So pretty much with all that being said, I'd expect a ton more PFL coverage coming this way. And while you're thinking about all the PFL coverage that is going to be produced by the three of us, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to follow the network across social media at ETB Network. You can follow the MMA Outsiders at MMA Outsiders ETB, and of course you can follow Tom and myself. For me, you can follow me at SamBando99. You can follow Tom at Thomas J. Albano, and of course you can find our work at many different places. You can find my stuff over at MMA Knockout and BJPen.com, and of course you can find Tom's stuff over at Inside an MMA News, and of course doing live results and live coverage for the PFL website as he does every single card, including the Europe and MENA card. So everything PFL Central related, he is your guy for all of that and so much more. And Tom, I'm sure that with the PFL's expansion and with everything that's going on with the PFL, it's getting more and more fun to be in the thick of the fold, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's fun to have an eye on all the action of what's going on, and it's going to be even more fun. It was already fun doing, the PFL Bellator Champions Special, kicking off the Europe stuff. Kicked the Europe event, the Bellator having its first event a couple of weeks ago. But now the big PFL global season is starting this week, and Bellator fighters then have invaded the PFL roster. So it's going to be really fun to watch how this all unfolds. Also, I want to say, make sure to go to etbpodcast.com for more information about the network, blogs from some of our contributors, because a lot of information is being pumped out. And of course, subscribe here at youtube.com/ETB Network. Yes, we're actually back on YouTube after a 1 week period where we were exiled to Elon land.
Even though we were exiled over there, the views on all of the major shows actually did pretty well. So it might end up starting even a brand new trend where the shows go up a few days later for our X audience as well, which is good.
I think so. I mean, the audience has clearly spoken. And then, of course, I can't forget the MMA Outsiders and the rest of the ETV network is presented by Wolf Spreads. Are you looking to get involved in the action while rooting for your favorite team? Have you ever had a friendly debate about who can pick the most games correctly? Does all this talk about parlays, lines, and over-unders make your head spin and you want to learn more about this sports betting hoopla? Well, gamble with us and come check out Wolf Spreads. Every week, we started up with them during the NFL season. We did little sports betting competitions completely free. Everybody got 2,000 fantasy dollars. Yes, fake money to bet on the action. Whoever was able to profit most on their $2,000 bankroll wins. good for NFL action, NBA, MLB, NHL, college football, and basketball. Put fantasy dollars on the over-under, the money line, or the spreads, competing for bragging rights with your fellow players while having additional fun watching sports, and not risk losing your house in the process. Full spread, sports betting for friends who love the action. And now, Zan, on that note, I think it's time to get into the action. We're going to go through our news stories first before we get into all the previews and such. Because I don't want to say, not a lot of news stories, but really not a lot. A lot in terms of potential quality. I'm just saying there's a lot of things that we got to go through with San Antonio, Atlantic City this past weekend. And of course, this weekend, we're taking a trip back to the APEX. APEX.
Which, by the way, is the first of back-to-back UFC events in Vegas, with one of them being slightly a little bit more important than the other, but just a little bit.
All right, but let's get into all the topics that we're going to talk about. Zan, with me on the DDT hype train, we can't help but start with this. So UFC 305 has already been announced. We don't even have an announcement for 304, but 305 has been confirmed. No, it's not going to be in Miami. Sorry, Pitbull. Dale. It's going to be in Perth in Australia, August 17th. And a couple of places, including the New Zealand Herald, has reported that the big, highly anticipated showdown.
A year in the making.
Yep, between middleweight champion Dricus du Plessis and the former champ Israel Adesanya is being targeted as the main event for that card. Obviously, both those fighters have African roots, African heritage, but I guess the next best thing is to do it within Israel Adesanya's home territory, basically.
Yeah, I mean, when I first sent this to you, I think you were more excited about this than I was. Let's just say
I cannot wait for that. Dan, I'm hoping this is true. Please, I'm praying this is true. This is the fight I really want to see.
Yeah, no kidding. And there's just so much bad blood. Like to me, like now, you have to strike where the iron's hot and do some sort of world tour for this, right? Or do you not?
I don't know if they're going to do. I don't know if they're going to do a press tour, honestly, but I definitely see they got to do. I mean, something with this, because remember, and as I don't know if you saw his tweets then earlier this week about how, I'm referring to Sean Strickland claiming that Canada didn't want him and tried to ban him from, from 297. Take for all of that what you will, but he has a point when he says, that he deserves a rematch, considering the fact how close Strickland DDP was, how highly intense that feud was, and even Dana White saying that he thought Strickland won. But it's obvious, Zan, I don't know if maybe this is obvious to you, but DDP Adesanya and the bad blood that can spur from that might be a bigger draw than a DDP Strickland rematch.
Oh, I've definitely been aware of it. I mean, that fight has been buzz on it even before Adesanya fought Strickland. It was almost a fight that was, almost like a foreshadow, very similarly to when Chuck Liddell fought Randy Couture in 2003, but everybody was still thinking about Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz at the time, and obviously we needed to wait. We needed to wait. I think it was 8 or 9 months for that fight to happen, and that was without a belt on the line. Thankfully, in this scenario, there would be a championship on the line, except now the red corner and blue corners are flipped.
Right. And I'm not saying it's wrong to take the rematch away from Strickland, but it goes to what your point was of, because you're going to take Strickland's rematch away, you have to go all out and make this a really big deal.
Well, right. And per se, you could make the argument, at least with some people, I don't know if you can make it for everyone, but with some people, at least from what I remember, there was a general consensus that Adesanya won the fight going away, and that Du Plessis won the fight against Strickland going away, and then there were other people that had it going the absolute other way. So I think it just goes to show, where the fan intrigue and where the fan interest is, that it's time for the middleweight division to move forward and have a fresh matchup, and this is the most fresh of a matchup that you could possibly get, given the guys that are currently sitting in the top 6 or 10 right now. So
Right. And Zan, honestly, then what you can do, considering Strickland's case, obviously I would think Zan Strickland would, and maybe he has to take another fight, but if he wins that fight, then what you could do is just have the winner of DDP Adesanya turn around and do a rematch with Strickland.
you could, but another big key is going to be the timeliness of it, because given what we
And
know.
actually, sorry, Zan, and actually, I'm gonna actually retract that thought a little bit, only because of another headline that we're gonna talk about that does involve the middleweight division and another potential eliminator.
Right. I just more so meant in general, if you were going to go the rematch route, meaning the immediate rematch route, timing is going to mean everything in terms of that.
Yeah.
So,
So I'm actually I'm gonna hold on the Sean Strickland and rematch card there, or at least as much as I would have gone into, because when we do talk about UFC Saudi Arabia in just a little bit, there is another fight there that could have some potential title implications, especially if one of those fighters in that main event is the one who comes out on top. But that's for that topic. But as far as this fight goes, Dan, I mean, like I said, I would have rather this had been in Africa for UFC's first ever card in Africa, but you can maybe make the argument that ship's kind of sailed after Adesanya lost and Usman lost and Ngannou departed the UFC. But him doing it, those two fighting in Australia might be the next best thing when you're gonna have DDP as the bad guy taking on the hometown hero in Adesanya, who we would have not seen then if the fight happens August 17th for 11 months. And after basically saying he was going to take some time away for all the fighting that he was doing. Because, yes, is he getting this, his
yes,
last
but
fight?
you and I also had the theory that if the UFC threw the money at him that he wanted, that he would take the fight.
Right. And that's what it seems like is happening here. Getting a nice payday, getting a rival like DDP. The only thing would be in terms of, the Strickland versus Adesanya, who deserves it more. And you and I talked about this when he first went away. Izzy's track record in his last like 4, 5, 6 fights has not been good.
No, it hasn't, but I think with this long layoff, that's going to be less of a concern compared to maybe taking a fight 3 months after a loss as compared to almost a year. So,
Ve- Very true. Very true. All I'm gonna say is I don't know who I'm gonna side with in this one. I mean, I love
okay.
DDP. But I mean, I guess I might side with DDP only because we haven't seen Izzy after such a long layoff that we don't know what he's going to come back to being. But this is one of those fights where I got to really think about it. And Zan, ultimately, this is one of those fights where I don't care who wins. I just want to be, you know, I'm obviously not going to travel to Australia, but I'm going to want to be, in front of a big TV somewhere, making sure that I have all eyes glued to this fight.
That's fair. So, something tells me these two are going to end up fighting each other at UFC 310 in January or 312 in March or um, in March of 25, rather. Something tells me that there's just rematch brewing all over this. So,
In other words, you're saying that the Izzy fight is held off, and you think the Izzy fight gets held off, and they do a rematch with Strickland,
yeah, exactly.
which isn't bad either. But like you said, I mean, maybe it is
But to
time
me,
for a
though,
fresher.
I think Strickland would need a win before the rematch in order to ensure that the
Which
rematch is going to
which is
happen.
fair because the other argument we can make, Zan, is that, and we were talking about this in the lead up to Izzy versus Strickland, is that you look at the level of competition Strickland's fought. It really hasn't been good. Actually, we talked about this even when we were heading to Strickland DDP. Other than the upset of Izzy, Strickland's level of competition hasn't been great. It doesn't compare to Izzy's. Not even doesn't even compare to DDP's.
No, it does not. Nope.
So there is that too. And you can make the argument on top of that. Strickland upset Izzy, and whether you think Strickland beat DDP or not, in the official record books, he lost the first title defense. So
Right.
it's you ever hear that expression transitional champion?
Yeah.
That's the point where we could, you know, that tag could right now be applied to Strickland.
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
listen, Strickland gets, it can never be taken away from you. One of the greatest upsets in UFC history. But as of right now, if somebody were to say, "Oh, Strickland was just a transitional champion," I mean, right now that's not wrong.
No, and it certainly gives the middleweight division this buzz that we haven't had since, geez, probably Anderson and Silva, Chael Sonnen, and one other contender that I'm probably not thinking of, where they were all in
Prob-
the thick of the middleweight title picture
yeah,
at the same time.
probably that point, like early 2010, up until Weidman's upset of. Actually,
Well,
I shouldn't even say that. I would maybe the leg break, Silva
well,
break.
and then maybe you could go as far or to say Weidman's lost to Rockhold in December of 2015.
That that actually would work.
Because
That
that
actually.
did, because that did end an era a little bit.
Well, you could also say that Vitor in 2014 or 15 not being allowed to use TRT also was a little bit of an end of an era because Vitor was in the mix still in the mid 2010s.
That's true, and he just couldn't win the big fights when they mattered most. That's correct.
That's
Yeah.
true. Lost to Silva, lost to Weidman. He couldn't win the big one.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The other part to this story that we have to talk about. So, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. I said there's only 3 fights that make sense for 303 in Las Vegas.
This was one of them.
This was one of them. If this fight is out, then Zan, does that mean, is this the biggest sign that we have Conor Chandler's happening at 303 during International Fight Week?
If it isn't, then I don't know what is.
The
That's
only
all I
other fight, the only other fight I can think of is Jones Stipe, but I don't know if you can do Jones Stipe if the rumor right now is July 27th in Manchester. You're going to have Aspinall defend the interim heavyweight title.
Yeah, I don't think you can do that.
So here's my theory, Zan. As much as I'll believe it when I see it. My theory is they might be waiting till 300, and at 300 they're going to make the announcement of Conor Chandler.
Well, we would hope so, but we also hope that the surprise isn't ruined. So we'll see.
Are
It's
you
gonna
saying
be
that? Are you suggesting that somebody like Ariel Helwani might get in front of it?
you never know. Hey,
Oh,
it's a good idea, but they need to make sure that no stone is unturned before that thing gets leaked out by the T-Mobile graphics people or something.
oh God, the Jones Gone botch. Oh God, that was a crazy day. Oh
It
wait,
really was.
Zan, I'm getting in my ear. Hold on. Yes, we have been banned by the UFC. Dana White has blacklisted us.
Oh, too funny.
We are getting the Ariel Helwani UFC 199 treatment.
It's too funny, man. Oh
All
my.
right.
Yeah, it was. It was a wild day. That's for sure.
But yeah, at this point, I mean, if you're gonna have all these fights that are booked right now, if you're not gonna do the women's flyweight title until Nosha UFC at 306 at the
Which
Sphere.
to me should be the main event for September 14th, if we're being honest. So,
So, but I'm saying, like, if you don't do that one, you already have the strawweight title on the line at 300. We
which
don't
would
know what.
probably mean also that this is totally unrelated, which would probably mean the strawweight title would be defended again at Madison Square Garden in November, because it would only make sense. So,
Right. So that would be out. Like, my point being that all these champions that have either just fought or already have fight schedules are running out of options, especially when we still don't have an announced main event for 302, and tickets for the Newark that card in Newark, New Jersey are supposed to go on sale soon. I'm assuming going based off.
they're actually supposed to go on sale the day before UFC 300.
So I'm assuming, based off of rumor and previous reports, it's gonna be Islam versus Dustin and Newark, because
That's what I would think.
it's either that or Bilal Muhammad's getting a title shot in his home state against Leon.
Right.
It's gonna be one of those two fights, and you're not gonna have one of those two fights headline 303 unless they were in a 300s no way out kind of scenario, because you're I'm assuming Islam is going to fight in June and then quickly turn around to fight in October in Abu Dhabi.
That would make sense, but why? Okay, so I guess that leads to another question. Then why do you think that Bilal versus Leon would make the most sense for UFC 302? Then
I didn't say that. And I said my preference is Islam versus Dustin, like we talked about before we started recording.
no,
But
I think you're misunderstanding my question. What I was trying to ask you is why do you think the UFC is potentially leaning in that direction of Edwards versus Muhammad? Is what I meant.
well, number one, I would have thought that they would have given that title shot to Chimaev, but not going to say anything because the next topic is going to involve Chimaev. The other thing is, and we've talked about this before, Bilal Muhammad is a tri-state area NYC boy, so this would be the place where he could main event, because we've talked about how Bilal
Well,
is on a big win
technically,
streak.
technically he was born in Chicago, but I don't disagree. But yeah,
Oh, right, he was born in Chicago, but
yeah,
you get
he
my you get
calls, yeah,
he
he
calls
call,
here home now.
right, yeah.
So my point was, Zan, is that Bilal. We've had this conversation about the UFC not wanting to give Bilal a title shot or a main event. It would only be fitting either in Chicago or here in the NYC that it would kind of make sense to give him that.
Right.
But I mean, the only other thing is, Zan, just as a thought, because of the whole scheduling stuff. If Conor Chandler headlines 303, do you see Bilal versus Leon potentially being a co-main event? Where I know I've talked about, I don't know if they'd ever do a title fight under a Conor fight, but the only time we've seen that is 196 when Misha Tate beat Holly Holm for the women's bantamweight title. Would they do that with a men's title like Leon Edwards, Bilal Muhammad?
I could see it, and I'm sure Bilal would not be opposed to trying to win the welterweight title in Vegas.
Probably not. So that's my thoughts at this point. So I'm still in the I'll believe it when I see it territory, but Zan, the stars are aligning. It's like a this is now or never. This has to, Connor Chandler has to be at 303.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if it isn't, then the only other option is November, or it doesn't happen at all. But it's gotta happen. It's gotta happen now. That way, everything can start to move in the way it's supposed to. And I mean, come on, like really, what are we doing here? We have Conor McGregor who has 2 fights left on his deal. Give him the fights that everybody wants to see, which is Michael Chandler and Nate Diaz 3, and you either call it a career or you try to just keep being in bigger super fights. But at this point, it's like people are gonna care or they're not gonna care. But I think what everyone can agree on is they at least want to see the conclusion that everybody wants to see, which is the conclusion of Tough Season 31, which is McGregor and Chandler. So
Yeah, we've been long away. Tough 32 is gonna start, and we still won't be done with Tough 31.
it's true. Because Tough 32 officially airs think it's June 1st.
I think so. And by the way, the other reason I brought up the welterweight title fight, potential welterweight title fight, I should say, is because, Zan, if they get put into a situation like 300 with the whole McGregor Chandler, and the whole negotiations, will they, won't they thing, I think the UFC wouldn't be opposed to doing Leon Bilal as the 302 main event rather than that headlining International Fight Week. I think they'd feel more comfortable with Islam Dustin as a backup plan main event for International Fight Week than Leon Bilal.
You think in a last resort, if he can't get Conor
Yes.
over, then they would do Islam versus Dustin and risk
Yeah.
Abu Dhabi in October.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Well, you know what? Let's transition right into the next segment because I was going to say, well, if Leon wins, or even if Bilal wins, especially if Leon wins, though, then what you could do if Islam isn't ready for October in Abu Dhabi, you could do Khamzat Chimaev, who's going to be involved in the first ever Saudi Arabia card
On
on June
ABC, no
22nd.
less.
Yeah, they're going to have it in ABC. Well, I assume because of the time difference, it'll air in the afternoon here in the US.
Right.
So
It'll start at the main card will officially start at 3 Eastern. So yeah, it is going to be a during the day UFC fight night. Yeah.
Which I'll always take. I always like a UFC card, beginning in the afternoon, ending at dinner time.
Right.
And the main event has been announced: Robert Whittaker, Khamzat Chimaev. So, Santa, going to a point that I was talking about in the last segment. We were sitting here thinking that Chimaev was going to be potentially next for Leon Edwards, and now he's going back out to middleweight, and he's fighting Robert Whittaker. And I assume if he beats Whittaker, what championship does he go after? Because there's a bunch of scenarios here where if he beats Whittaker, the welterweight and middleweight worlds become his oyster.
Yeah, I was gonna say whatever he decides to do is gonna be massive.
But I assume, especially, if Islam loses to Dustin and Islam's ready to go, then they could do a rematch in Abu Dhabi. But if Islam's not ready to go in Abu Dhabi in October, I assume Chimaev's the backup headliner.
That would be my guess too. Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's gonna be this is a outstanding main event. Stylistically, these are two high action packed fighters. Robert Whittaker is obviously a former UFC middleweight champion. He's very much playing the Max Holloway role, pretty similarly, where he can beat everybody, but he can't beat the champion. And this is more than likely his last chance at a title shot. Otherwise, he may not get one again, considering that he's getting up there in age. And you have Khamzat Chimaev, who's had all this hype around him over the last 5 years, has really only beat maybe 1-2 quality opponents, but the rest is really it. This is his first real test, and it's going to be really interesting to see, how he fares against someone that has so much middleweight championship experience like a Robert Whittaker. And people forget that Khamzat Chimaev doesn't really have 5-round experience that maybe people may think he does. So overall, this fight can go multiple different ways. But what I do know is this is setting up to be one of the best non-title fights of the entire year by far, without a doubt.
Sure. Oh, for sure. And if I remember right, his win over Gilbert Burns, that was a 3-rounder?
It was a 3-round fight.
That was a 3-round.
But the fight was so awesome that it felt like it was 5 rounds, and you wanted 2 more rounds of that fight. That's how good it was.
Well, we get the opportunity here to see Chimaev in action in a 5-round fight, and it's going to be very interesting. Whittaker, like you mentioned, Whittaker has the 5-round experience. Chimaev doesn't.
Right. And also Whittaker is technically going into enemy territory because it's in Saudi Arabia, and you better believe there's going to be way more Chimaev fans there than there will be Whittaker fans for sure. Geez, Tom, if Robert Whittaker wins, I would fear for his safety almost immediately.
No post-fight interview. You just get him the hell out of there.
No kidding.
You do the post-fight interview on the plane.
Well, no kidding. You do like an exclusive with Pulse and MMA or the Mac Life or something or like that, where you're sitting in first class on a private jet getting interviewed. Yeah.
But Zan, the rest of this card is actually looking pretty fire. You got Johnny going up from like first fight to main event.
Right.
You got Johnny Walker taking on Volkan Oezdemir. You got Kelvin Gastelum taking on D-Rod, Daniel Rodriguez.
Which is the biggest fight of D-Rod's career, I might add. Huge fight.
If he wins this, then he's got to get not a top contenders fight. Like, he's not going to take on the number 1 contender, but he'll definitely be taking on somebody in the top 10, if not top 5.
Right. Huge fight.
Sharon Magomedov taking on Ior Peteria.
And by the way, Bullet is one one of the best prospects in the entire UFC and might end up being a future champion in the next 4 years.
For
So
sure.
he's
And then
he's really a prospect to watch. It is a can't miss fight, especially considering it's midway through the main cards. That's one that you definitely do not want to go to the bathroom or get popcorn during. That's for sure.
and then in the co-main event, Zan, Sergei Pavlovich was going to be in action. Now, I think prior to this, they had announced Sergei Pavlovich to be in a different fight. I want to assume, I think it was either Gelton Almeida or something like that he was supposed to fight. Oh no,
Dude,
it was Volkov. Volkov was booked against him.
that sounds right. Hang on.
I want to do a quick check. Yeah, I could have sworn it was supposed to be Gelton Almeida taking on Volkov. Yeah, it was supposed to be Almeida versus Volkov.
Yes. Yeah,
At
it was.
302. At 302. But then all of a sudden the UFC Saudi Arabia card, which takes place 3 weeks after 302 gets announced, Volkov gets moved from 302 to the Saudi Arabia card to take on Sergei Pavlovich in Pavlovich's first fight since he lost the interim heavyweight title fight with Tom Aspinall at the Garden. Well, about that. So reports have now come out over the weekend that supposedly this comes from MMA Mania and a couple of different
MMA Mania and I actually just verified Sportskeeda confirmed it as well.
Sportskeeda has confirmed it.
This is a real story. Yeah.
And the reason we bring those two up is because it actually started from 2 Russian MMA media outlets.
Now it's being transitioned back over here, which is good.
So this is now confirmed as a real story. Pavlovich versus Volkov, which was announced as the co-main for UFC Saudi Arabia, is now in question. Supposedly, according to one of the Russian MMA media outlets, both Pavlovich and Volkov have a strong bond where they've actually trained with one another before. And supposedly both men in their fight camps were caught off guard by the announcement. And so now negotiations are still taking place, and this fight now is not for certain.
Well, honestly, I've just always been one of those people where if you're friends and you don't want in a fight, that's fine with me. That's my personal take on it. So good for them for defending their friendship and not trying to defame it in any way. Because if I was in their shoes, I probably would not want to fight either.
I think normally, Zan, I don't side with that. I feel like if, when it comes to, say, major title implications, like this fight could be for Pavlovich.
Right. Well, I'm just saying also the layer of that they were taken off guard by
that's the problem I have with it. If it's true that the UFC announced it before the contracts were officially signed, that's a little bit of a crappy move.
Yeah, it's bad. Because it reeks of the Benoit Saint Denis Dustin Poirier situation from UFC 299, which was obviously resolved, but it wasn't without controversy from the promotional aspect of that fight. So,
and I think something actually happened with Aljo. A fight got announced ahead of time before contracts were signed too, but I forget what fight that was.
Oh yeah, good point. I think I remember that too, but I don't remember the fight. Yeah.
But nevertheless, this card, Zan, I forget who said it on Twitter, but I was looking and they're like, they said, this is a fantastic card and it should be celebrated. But somebody said, this is the problem. It's like this card, and everyone's like, oh wow, a fight night that's actually worth watching. And it's like, this is supposed to be the norm for fight nights that they're saying.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I can say for certainty that it wasn't me. Otherwise, I would have been all over it. But
yeah,
whoever said that is 100% right. That's for sure.
It points again to the problem of overabundance, oversaturation of UFC cards versus the money that they're getting from ESPN.
Again, if it was it's 44 cards. If you cut it in half, the card quality is still good. Just make bigger fights on the other 22 or whatever it is.
But they're getting a lot of money from ESPN for
I know. It's a quota. They have a contract. I'm just saying if they did, the quality of fights would go up.
I mean, it makes it more interesting, Zan, when you talk about this and the UFC's upcoming rights deals in the US.
Yeah, it certainly is. I'm a little biased, and I hope they stay with ESPN. But if they go to one of these other streaming services, which I already have, I wouldn't be opposed to it. So
Fair enough. One other announcement. Speaking of the UFC Apex, because we bring them up with the quality of and quantity of fight night cards, they're also going to be hosting a WWE event this year. So yes, as we're getting ready for a big weekend, WrestleMania weekend, it was announced, reported by several wrestling and UFC related sources, the WWE's NXT brand, which is kind of like their third brand. Some would still say to this day, developmental league.
it's very similar to what like Dana White Contender Series would be to the WWE. Is that
Right. Yes, but
okay?
it's not one match and then you go to Raw or SmackDown.
Right,
It's a brand like Raw or SmackDown is. But
right.
essentially,
Okay.
they are going to be hosting, because now NXT does its own events. You know how Raw and SmackDown, they'll have the WrestleMania, the Royal Rumble, the SummerSlam.
Yeah,
NXT
absolutely.
doesn't take part in those. They take part in their own branded events. They're going to
Right.
have one called Battleground on Sunday, June 9th. And the host venue is going to be the UFC Apex.
Which, for context, only holds 1,000 people. So
Now, the Performance Center, because they tape their show at the WWE Performance Center, kind of like a studio setup. That hold, I don't know if there's an exact number of the amount of people that it holds, but I would say 1,000 maybe is at the level of what they do, if not less. So I'm curious. We've seen how the Apex has been set up for the few folks who get to watch those fight night cards live, but I wonder how they're going to set something up for NXT. Like I want to see how the Apex is structured for a wrestling events rather than the UFC events that we've seen.
yeah, it definitely will be interesting. And as someone who's a WWE outsider, entirely, I have no skin in the WWE game at all.
Mm.
That's going to be extremely interesting. Just from a very, very, very casual observer perspective, just to even see what they remotely do to make the audience even interested in watching the event. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. And you were the one who actually broke the news to me that this was happening.
Yeah.
So
Well, you
kudos.
broke the news to me from earlier before we started recording, which is also going to be an interesting to see how it plays out. That June 8th, the day before, right now the plan is to do a fight night and a
Mhm.
UFC Vegas at the Apex.
Yeah, it's supposed to be. They don't even know who's on the card yet or anything, but it's a tentative target date for a Apex show on June 8th.
I feel bad for those workers, so I want to see how they turn around from an MMA card to a wrestling card.
Same here.
All
Shout
right.
out to couple of a couple of very solid sources in in Discord chat. Which, by the way, if you're not in this Discord chat and you are considered an MMA savant or obsessed with the MMA, you better get in it because it is huge. There has to be at least 150 people in this chat, and this Discord is constant every single day. So I don't know. It'll be interesting.
It'll be fun to see. All right. Let's go away now from the wrestling. Let's focus in on the MMA action. We're going to start with the previews before we get into the recaps. The PFL begins its 2024 season, global season, this Thursday, April 4th, starting in San Antonio. Again, shout out to producer Pat Dana, who's over in San Antonio right now for the card that will take place on April 4th. Main event, it's going to be, I think, the heavyweight division and the women's division. This year, it's going to be women's flyweight. They're not going to do featherweight or lightweight. It's going to be women's flyweight. That will go first in its first stage of the first half of the season. Main event, Ante Dalia taking on Valentin Moldavsky.
Yeah, this fight can end one of two ways. Either Moldovsky wins a decision, or Agent knocks Moldovsky out. What do you think?
I mean, as far as I know, the fight itself, like uh Dalia has championship level experience. Oh, he was Did he win a championship? No, I think he might have been injured. No, did he win the heavyweight championship? He won it in 2022. I was
Yeah,
like, wait a minute. I was like, I had his Tapology up. I'm like, wait, but he
he
didn't
won
win
it. He
last
won it 2
season.
years ago.
I was like, wait, he didn't win last season. So I misread it. 2022 championships. Okay, so he won in 2022. He was supposed to defend in 2023.
But he was
Obviously,
hurt. He was injured though.
he got injured before his fight with Yorgan De Castro. Ended up taking a short notice bout with Maurice Green, but at that point, too little, too late to even make the playoffs. But it was good to see him still in action.
And that was still when Maurice Green was like on his little resurgence, and people thought it was going to be a bad matchup for him, and people ended up being very very wrong about that. Am I not mistaken?
I think, yeah. I mean, Maurice Green, they were pushing him in the PFL. They were pushing him to be
I
somebody to
remember
watch for.
I remember that.
I think that might have been because he's John Jones's training partner.
Right, and that was still when all the rumors were swirling that Jones was going to be coming back to the UFC last year after the Gone heavyweight championship win, and that did not happen.
Yeah, that
So
Maurice Green fight took place in June. So I think that might have been the card, and Ghana was there, and they did the stare down and
that's
all.
that's right. Yeah. Absolutely,
But
absolutely.
but yeah, so that's Ante Dalia. It's gonna be interesting to see how he fares in this season. And then Valentin Moldavsky. Oh, Dan, that's something to talk about. Bellator invasion. Bellator fighters have made their way over to the PFL season format now, so it's gonna be interesting to see this level of competition play out.
Yeah, good for them, and it will definitely make for a more competitive season. That's for sure.
So obviously, Valentin Moldavsky will have the edge when it comes to level of competition, but he's lost against Ryan Bader and Linton Vassell. He got a win against Steve Maury. That was their them running it back after their first fight ended in an eye poke in seconds. So I mean, he's got, like I mentioned, Moldavsky's got wins over Roy Nelson, Tim Johnson, Maury, but he's lost to Vassell. He's lost to Bader. Do you think that's going to give him problems against somebody like a D'Elia? I want to say no, but I think people might be underestimating D'Elia because, one, his PFL background, and two, because he's coming back essentially from a long layoff with his injury-ridden 2023. I'm gonna go with D'Elia though. I put trust in his power. I've seen his power on display, and I think he'll be able to showcase it here against Moldavsky. Do I think he's gonna get a finish?
Probably
That's a
not,
little up
right?
for, yeah, that's a little up for debate. I think he ends up getting a decision win.
Okay. I'm gonna take Dewey as well. I think if he can survive the early storm, is just with Moldavsky's pressure, he should be able to win a decision too. So I'm with you. I'm with you there on that.
Cool. Co-main event, also in the heavyweight division, it's gonna be Dennis Goltsov taking on Linton Vassell. Goltsov was the runner-up last season. He lost to Renan Ferreira in the championship fight, but prior to that, had a first-round finish against Cesar Ferreira, first-round finish against Yorgan De Castro, first-round finish against Jordan Heiderman. And then you got Linton Vassell from Bellator, who was a longtime light heavyweight and a light heavyweight title contender, but then ends up moving up to heavyweight in late 2019, beats Sergei Karatanov, beats Ronnie Marks, Tyrell Fortune, Tim Johnson, and then I mentioned before, beat Valentin Moldavsky. And then he was supposed to fight Ryan Bader for the Bellator title at Bellator 300, but ended up getting injured. So this is his first fight since beating Moldavsky and basically losing out on a title shot because Bellator ends up going into PFL and he joins the PFL.
Yes. Well, I guess just out of curiosity, do you think that this Vassell fight is too quick of a turnaround considering he was part of some of the latter Bellator cards, or do you think this is the right
I
first
mean,
regular season
the
matchup
last
for
time
him?
he fought, Zan, the last time he fought was Bellator 292. He didn't fight at 300 because of the injury.
No, right, but I'm saying he did fight during the I guess latter end of the Bellator era. I would say Bellator 292 is still relatively close.
March 2023. So it's basically been a year since we've seen him in the cage.
Right. Um So I guess with that being said, how do you see this fight playing out holistically then?
I mean, what's going to be tough is going to be, they both have some great power. You can't knock either guy for their power. I don't know if necessarily this one is going to come down to the ground game, but I part of me really wants to go with Goltsov with his first round finish streak, but I think Linton Vassell is another level of competition, and Linton Vassell has fought tougher competition. So I'm gonna go with Linton Vassell. I don't know if I want to go with a first round finish though. I don't know if I want to give that on Goltsov. I'm gonna go Vassell second round finish.
I'm gonna go actually with Goldsov to win a decision. I I think he'll do enough to gas Vassell out. Use his wrestling and use his ground and pound to open up the season with a win. It'll be a good fight though.
Good. And then we've got the women in action. Interesting featured bout for the women's flyweight division. You've got Liz Carmouche taking on Juliana Velasquez. So Carmouche, I guess the no longer Bellator women's flyweight champion because the both of them head over to the PFL.
Yeah, I'm still picking Carmouche because his championship experience is championship experience, even though she no longer has that title next to her name. I think that Velasquez is a good fighter, but I think that Carmouche should be able to edge her out in almost every aspect of MMA. And I think she'll try to attempt a couple of submissions, but will fall short. And I actually have Carmouche winning a decision over Velasquez.
Zan, by the way, this is the third time they faced off. They faced off for the Bellator Gold in 2022.
No,
Yeah.
oh no, no, I know. I'm just saying Carmouche, as far as I remember, is the
Oh
only
no,
one that's
Zan.
had the
No,
title in this series.
I know, Zan. What I'm saying is, I don't know how you can pick Velasquez when Carmouche has a fourth round submission win and a second round submission win over Velasquez both times.
Exactly,
I
which
don't know.
which is why I think she'll use her jujitsu to set things up. I just don't think she'll be able to get the finish this time because after the third time, you should at least know. Okay, I need to defend the submissions in order to still have a chance.
Uh the thing is, we haven't seen Velasquez since the second loss to Carmouche, so it's been a year and a half since we've seen her. I think she might have some rust on her. So I'm gonna go with Carmouche on this one. I think she does get the finish. I could see second or third round she taps her out again.
It'll be very interesting. But at least we can both agree that Carmouche walks away with the win and still makes the statement that she is a force to be reckoned with at 125 pounds. That's for sure.
Absolutely. One thing I do want to bring up before we talk about Vegas 90s main event. So PFL executive Pete Murray actually did a Q&A with the score. Shout out Nick Baldwin. And basically he was asked, because some of the conversations and after the PFL Bellator card was, maybe they should have just done a complete merge, fold Bellator and just have all the fighters under one PFL brand. And
Right.
Nick Baldwin asked him, "Do you have plans to do that?" And he said, "Absolutely not. They like the Bellator Champion Series how it is. They like how Bellator is essentially a branch of the PFL and in some ways still reflects the Bellator promotion prior to the PFL purchasing it, and they want to keep it that way."
It's definitely interesting, but I think it's overkill because you're gonna keep seeing these fights get delayed that people really want to see, and that's I think the issue. And if you're trying to get newer fans into the sport that like don't follow it as religiously as you or I or a bunch of other people in the community do, I could understand the newer fan that started watching MMA maybe a year to 2 years ago that will now go, oh, what is the difference between PFL and Bellator? And like for me, if I was just starting out, which I'm not, but if I was like a newer fan, I think I would be just as confused. So I think I understand where he's coming from because he wants to keep the Bellator name alive, but I think there's got to be a point in time where you got to just say enough is enough and let's just make the fights that people want to see regardless of what promotion it's under. But I understand that they have to run a business and this is this is what they're supposed to do in regards to this partnership. I just think
Right.
there are other ways to go about it that I don't think is this, but that's a conversation for another day. But yeah,
I was gonna say, because maybe that stretches into the debate about the PFL and the season format, which a lot of with
which,
some
as
people.
you know, and I've said several times on this show, I've never been a fan of the season
I know you've
format.
never been a fan of it. I find it kind of unique, and maybe that's because since we're hardcores, I can kind of, it's a little something different. It's a little different of a flair. But overall, Zan,
It would be cooler if the marketing made it feel like this is week one of the PFL, for example, very similarly to how during the NFL season, when you see the commercials of all the games, it's like, oh, you who know 1000% it's week one of the NFL. I just don't feel the same whenever I see a PFL ad
sometimes,
if I ever do.
well, number one, sometimes, Zan, I think that might be because the ESPN has the UFC, so they've obviously got the number one promotion in the world to handle with. And number two, I think, Zan, my big thing about PFL and Bellator being the separate brands but under the same banner, you know where I'm going to go with this because I talked about all the time last year. We talked about the PFL Bellator sale, is that two promotions means more opportunities to fighters, and I think it's good if we have more opportunities for fighters. Now some people might say, yeah, well, some of these guys with PFL Bellator name, they could go, if they were under one roof, they could go, if they weren't picked up by PFL, they could go to, say, an LFA or a Titan FC and increase their watchability and their eyes on them. And to
Well,
that point,
they could, but the issue is they're
they're
not
going to lower level competition.
right. It's such a lower level competition, and also they're not going to be getting paid the same amount is what they
Yeah,
would in all the
exactly.
right.
The LFA and Titan FC and all them, and I love them, but when we say they're minor league feds and their feeder systems, it's not just because, of the talent. It's also because as much as we want to talk about fighter pay, especially in regards to the UFC, they're not going to get paid at the LFA Titan FC level as they would with the UFC, with PFL, with Bellator.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so
It definitely is an interesting debate, but I will say it's good to see Peter Murray not shying away from this question because he could have easily ignored Baldwin and said, that's too far. I'm not going to answer it." But at the very least,
I will
he
give
answered
credit.
it and tried to give the most candid answer he could.
And I'll give credit that he was actually very open and honest with this Q&A because he talked about the Cyborg stuff, and he still says, like Donn Davis says, the plan is summer, Cyborg Pacheco. He talked about Ngannou, and he said, look,
Which arguably does mean your idea of them doing two major summer events is probably the way they're going to have to do it.
well, again, the question comes to which he talked about whatever's going on with Ngannou, and he said there's a partnership that's going on, so we're going to try to do our best to work with Francis. It's not the end of the world. It's not disaster. When he teases, oh, I want to do a third boxing fight. They still have Francis
Right.
as a partner. So
Exactly.
he answered questions, like he didn't, like you said, he didn't no comment anything as far as I know. So it was open, it was candid, it was straightforward, and that's great because Stan, we don't get that all the time with Dana.
No, we don't.
We get it.
Nor do we ever sometimes.
I say we get that sometimes with Dana, but not all the time.
Right.
All right. Speaking of Dana, speaking of the UFC, back over to the Apex for a very interesting rematch coming on very short notice. Brendan Allen, Chris Curtis too.
Yeah, so just to kind of go over the scope of where we are at in the UFC calendar, it is the first event in the month of April. Again, and as Tom alluded to, we are back at the UFC Apex. This is the 12th UFC event of the year, so we're at 12 out of 44 events, and so far 138 fights. That is correct. 138 fights have
Damn.
taken place in the UFC octagon. We have another set of them this weekend just to go over how the crew did a week ago during UFC Atlantic City. I went 8-5. Tom had a bit of a down week. This is his worst week so far
It was
the
bound
UFC
to happen
schedule.
eventually after all the good weeks I was having.
Yes, you had a bunch of pretty solid weeks in a row where you held steady, but this week was a little bit harder. You went 4-9, and then at Dana, who as we alluded to, obviously is not here because he's in San Antonio. He held firm at 7-6, which means overall, for the month of March, I went 33-30-1 for the month. You went 35-28-1, and Pat went 37-26-1, which brings our overall records to the following. Pat leads the dance with an 83 52-3 record. You were right behind him at 79 56-3, and because of my stellar 8-5 week a week ago, I am now 68 67-3 going into UFC Vegas 90, which
You're in
brings
the
us
black.
to,
You're in the black. You're not in the red anymore.
thankfully, let's hope I can start to turn into the green as March turns to April. We are starting with this card. We are back at the Apex. It is the first of 2 UFC events from Las Vegas before their break in the middle of the month. We have Brendan Allen taking on Chris Curtis, a rematch almost 2 years in the making, a fight that you could have argued very easily could have had in UFC Atlantic City a week ago, but that did not occur. It is now at the UFC Apex, I guess, to kind of lead into this preview here. Tom, do you think that this was the right fight done by the matchmakers, and do you think that it's good to give Brendan Allen an opportunity to rewrite a wrong, so to speak?
I think so, especially when you consider that the original fight was supposed to be Brendan Allen versus Marvin Vettori, and then a couple weeks ago, Vettori was forced out of the fight because of injury issues, freak injury. So I don't see why not. I mean, for Brendan Allen, you give him a chance to right a wrong, and for Chris Curtis, on short notice, you give him an opportunity to basically show why he did get the win in that fight. And for Chris Curtis, also, especially for him, lost against Jack Hermanson last year, beats Joaquin Buckley, which is actually a pretty good win now that Buckley is going to be at number 11 after his performance last week, which we'll get into in just a little bit. The loss to Kelvin Gastelum, the no contest, that clash of heads against Simavov, and split decision against Marc-Andre Barriault. Chris Curtis, the action man, he had a hell of a run, but it's kind of been slowing up a little bit as of late. So maybe a win against a familiar foe in Brendan Allen might be what he needs to, set things back on the right track.
Yeah, that could very well be the case, and
I'm
it definitely.
I'm saying basically for both of these fighters, they do need this win. So I like the matchmaking here.
Yeah, I mean, and for sure, this is no doubt solid matchmaking for sure, and this is one of those fights that could go multiple different ways. But I just think Brendan Allen knows what he needs to do. As long as he can avoid Chris Curtis's power shots, he should be able to win a decision. What do you think?
Yeah, that my question, which is what I'm wondering, because thinking about Tapology and what the people are saying over there, thinking about what you just said, thinking about how the first fight played out. I'm just wondering, Zan, if Chris Curtis, is this too short of a notice for a fight against Brendan Allen? That, is Brendan Allen more fit and ready to go that he can, as you said, avoid the power and everything? And I could see it. I can see that he's more fight ready, and so he has the better game, and he ends up getting I think he ends up getting a decision win and getting revenge.
Yeah, I could definitely see that as well. I just don't see how this fight is boring. What do you think?
No, I think this one goes the distance, but I don't think it's boring by any means.
No, I don't think so either. And by the way, I did just a very quick math correction. Actually did not go 4-9. You went 5-8. That is my bad. There, it is still your worst week though. Just as a
If 5-8 is better than 4-9, so I'll take it.
excellent. And so I mean it's a little unfortunate though, considering that we are going into UFC 300, and this is the card on the back. I can't, and that you got to admit that you were hoping for a card like this on the week prior to UFC 300, and I'm back to big Vegas shows, you would hope to see something a little bit better from the Apex, but unfortunately, that is not what we got.
No, but to be fair, Zan, Atlantic City card didn't look so great, and I mean the main card was amped, but the prelims were pretty fire.
Oh, for sure. I mean, what's there to say that what's there to say that more Apex cards can't start it at 4 p.m. Eastern with the main card starting at 7? Because I can guarantee you, if that actually did start to become a thing, the Apex cards would be a lot better.
Oh yeah,
That's for sure.
and that's the other thing. The last 2 weeks, the main card for both the Vegas that happened a couple weeks ago and Atlantic City this past weekend, 10 p.m. Eastern start times have been brutal.
Terrible. Absolutely terrible.
But let's get into the action of Atlantic City. Manon Fiorot pulling off a shocker. Not so much a shocker in that she beat Erin Blanchfield, but how she dominated this fight. I mean, Erin Blanchfield, Zan, just had no answer to Fiorot's range and her striking. Fiorot kept her distance, and basically Erin Blanchfield always tried to charge and come in and get inside, and Fiorot always landed and nabbed her. It was completely like nobody has done this to Blanchfield as far as I can tell.
No one has done this to Blanchfield, and this fight was out of reach after the second round.
No pun intended.
You knew, no pun intended. And then of course this is the story I briefly spoke about off air that I wanted to get into. But in the middle of the third round, thanks to Jedi Goodman, he caught a clip of a husband and wife or girlfriend and boyfriend, whatever you want to call it, walking out of their VIP or getting up out of their VIP seats to walk out of the arena in the middle of the third round. Once I saw that, I had immediate flashbacks to September of 2010. I went to the Frank Mir, Antonio Ruggiero Nogueira fight in Indianapolis. The first 2 rounds were so bad that people in a section were leaving before the third round even started.
Oh,
It immediately took me back to that fight, however many years ago that was. I think it was in 2010. But trust me, those people walked out. I've been there, and I feel you, on that. So.
I mean, but San, you gotta admit, that was such a dominating performance that, I mean, maybe you give her one more fight, but it's gonna be hard to not justify giving Fiorot a title shot unless you're guaranteeing the winner of Grasso Shevchenko 3 a super fight with Weili Zhang if Weili gets past Yang Xiaonan at 300 next week.
What do you think is the more suitable option between those two things?
The more exciting options, and the one I
Yes,
want to see
yes,
is the super fight. I want to see Weili versus Valentina if Valentina gets her win and title back.
but
Otherwise,
Valentina on one condition: Valentina versus Weili has to happen in Beijing, right?
I don't know about that.
Why not?
I could see that fight happening in a Vegas card, like a
You don't
pay-per-view in Vegas.
you don't think that fight's big enough to do a stadium in China though?
I wouldn't mind seeing China, but we've talked about it might be a little hard to book, and I think Dana's talked about it being a little hard to book in China.
Yeah, that's a fair assumption there. I mean, I think what's even more interesting is that that super fight is also a possibility. But Farrell, given her star power internationally, if she was matched up with the right fight, the fight could sell well. That's for sure.
Well, here's my question, Sam. One last question before we move on to look at the other fights. I saw one take because I was obviously recapping for MMA news. I forget what person on Twitter or some fan who said they could see Fiorot finishing Grasso if Fiorot got a title shot against Grasso. Do you?
That's bold. Couldn't see a finish, but winning a decision is definitely not out of the realm of possibility.
And that's the thing, Zan. I mean, maybe I'm just saying it because we haven't seen Grasso face anyone in the title fights other than Shevchenko. But If you put Manon Fiorot versus Valentina Shevchenko, I'd probably side with Shevchenko. But put Fiorot against Grasso, with this performance, and I could see Fiorot beating Grasso. Like you said, maybe by a decision. I don't know about finish, but I could see it. I think this was a statement win by Fiorot, bar none.
You think so? I
I
think
think
so
so.
too. I think so too. And this is one of those wins where Blanchfield, it seemed like, didn't know what to do from round 2 on.
Oh,
Didn't
this
know didn't know
yeah.
what to do.
And while it's disappointing about Blanchfield, Zan, this isn't about Blanchfield and a lack of talent. This is that Fiorot is for real. If you didn't believe in her, but as much as I picked Blanchfield, Zan, what did I say last week? Don't count Fiorot out. And now this was a performance that said, if you don't believe in Fiorot now, I mean, if you don't believe in Fiorot now, you're never going to.
Oh, for sure. Even though it may have not been the most exciting fight in the world, she got the win, and she beat someone that had her whole hometown behind her. And plain and simple, Blanchfield did not
Not
fight
just
like.
beat, Zan, not just beat, dominate.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Especially if you want to talk about dominant, rounds 4 and 5 were the definition of that.
For sure.
No doubt. I mean, and that was a mop the floor clean 4-1-5-0 decision, no questions asked, for sure.
Co-main event. Speaking of big statement performances, Joaquin Buckley, in case you forgot, he is back. And he ends up getting a second round finish of Vicente Luque. First round, very even, a lot of striking on both ends. And then the second round, I think Luque tried for a takedown. Buckley just said no. And Buckley just took over from there and got the finish on the ground. And Buckley is definitely going to end up being, I don't I don't have the new rankings in front of us if they have been released already, but he's definitely going to be just outside of the top 10, if not the top 10. And Zan, he's going to get a top 10 opponent next. He wants a top 10 opponent next. And not just that, so Derek Lewis got announced as the main event for UFC St. Louis, and Buckley said on the post-fight conference, and he said, I don't know about that. I think I want to turn around, do a month and a half turnaround and fight on the St. Louis card, which would be amazing if he did that.
Oh, for sure. The St. Louis fans would come out for it. My feelings on going to the card would go from 70-30 to 100%. There's a lot of positives there.
Well, you
Yeah.
don't want to go see Derek Lewis fight?
I mean, I do. I just need to know who's on the rest of the card. So
Fair enough. But yeah,
hey,
big win for Buckley.
I would never turn down an opportunity to see Derek Lewis fight 3 hours away from me. That's for sure. So
But nevertheless, Buckley, huge victory. This was definitely a victory that he needed to establish himself back in the UFC welterweight rankings. And San, did you see the footage that came out beforehand that he was at a Harrah's on the boardwalk at the pool, partying up with people before going into the cage?
yeah, that was funny. That was super funny.
It would have looked really bad if he had lost the fight, but he ends up getting a finish, and now it looks absolutely legendary.
Right.
All right.
Now I guess let's address the elephant in the room. Did you think the stoppage was suspicious at all?
No, not really.
I didn't think so either. I thought, Luke Kane was not intelligently defending himself. He curled up. I had no issues with the stoppage at all. I just could not believe that Buckley actually won. That's what
By a
I,
stoppage, yeah.
that's what I couldn't believe. And I picked him, but I wasn't sure. I was torn on that fight.
I mean, it wasn't that Buckley. I didn't think Buckley would win, but finishing Vicente Luque with a
Crazy.
TKO was jaw dropping.
Considering that, thanks to our newest contributor Brett Cagle, that Luke Cage finished 19 of his 22 opponents going into the
I
fight.
know, and unfortunately, R.I.P. Brett Streak. He went 0-2 on his bets this week.
I know. Let's see what heaters he has coming up this week on some of the various undercard fights, because he needs a nice bounce back week after going perfect through the first two. So
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the real elephant in the room, Zan, from Atlantic City. Let's talk about the controversy. Chris Weidman gets an absolute feel-good win against Bruno Silva. Actually gets his first finish since 2017. Or so we thought. So, a couple of eye pokes during the fight. Once Weidman poked Silva in the eye. The other time, then we had the simultaneous eye poke. And then they both get a hard warning from referee Gary Copeland, or as I call them, a jacked Keith Peterson.
That's
Tell
what
me
he
I'm
is.
wrong.
That's who he is. Yeah.
And then another eye poke happens. Copeland misses it. Weidman pounds away, gets the TKO finish. Then, as Weidman's celebrating, going on the outside of the cage, embracing and soaking it all in, Silva is immediately up, protesting to Copeland, telling him, "Look on the big screen." The commission of New Jersey steps in, and Zain, as you know, anytime we go to the New York area, or New York, New Jersey area, anytime we go to the Texas area,
it's questionable.
There's always something going on with the judging. And here's what the commission did. They took the TKO away, but they decided to score the fight from the point of the stoppage as if it were a technical decision. But they didn't award Weidman a technical decision win. They awarded him a unanimous decision win with 30-27s all across the scorecard.
It's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
I'm going to go to the sound effects board that Nick and I always use because What? That's how I felt watching that. Like, what?
Mm-hmm.
It was sad. It kind of soiled what should have been a really big comeback victory for White, because he was up 2-0.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And I was worried. Well, not worried because I'm such a stickler when it comes to records. I'm like, wait, are we going to have our first no contest, which means we're going to have 4 categories now instead of...
Well, Silva has appealed the decision with the New Jersey Commission, so there's still a chance it might.
Oh, I know. It's wild stuff, though.
How did you feel? I don't know if you saw any of the aftermath. Weidman saying that, hey, you can't drop to the ground like that on the eye poke. The referee isn't always going to help you. And Bruno Silva's basically saying it was all BS, feeling that there was some biasness considering Weidman's comeback story and considering the fact that Weidman actually started his career with the Ring of Combat promotion in Atlantic City.
It's not Weidman's fault for a referee mistake. That's what I think.
Fair enough. And did you see that he actually said when he was talking to MMA fighting post-fight that he wanted to beat the referee up?
Yeah, that was funny, and that was definitely very un-Chris Weidman-like, so I was not expecting that.
Well, that was Bruno Silva saying that.
No, I'm saying more so you especially when I meant to say
are you talking about what Weidman was doing, like celebrating and everything?
Yeah.
And well, he addressed that in a post-fight. He said basically he felt, after the leg break and the journey that he had to go through and everything that's happened to him overall since losing the title to Rockhold, like this moment kind of, like he felt it.
Interesting. What do you think?
It's definitely not Weidman's fault. I do feel a little disappointed in his actions post-fight as somebody who's been supporting him since the Silva days. It kind of is a little disappointing. And I think just overall, I'm soured by it because, like I mentioned, it's supposed to be a big comeback win for Chris Weidman, and it's all spoiled now. And who knows if it even stays a win.
Yeah, and just given that, he's on the tail end of his career, you would hate to see, not a legacy tarnished, but, people remember him at the end of his career for something like that. For something he more than likely didn't even really intend to do.
Yeah.
That's just me, though.
I know. It's sad. Although, Zain, there was one funny part of it. There was one funny thing. And hold on, I'm trying to get something on my phone. Because did you see in the celebration who was there in the, who he was embracing that was close to him?
Yeah, I did see.
You know who I'm going with here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hold on. I need to bring it up because I have to play it just because it's an opportunity to play it.
Yeah, of course. His dad, of all people, had to get involved again.
And he actually said it. I think you could hear him on the mic and said, "Still my boy." All right, Sam, one other thing I want to bring up from Atlantic City, though, another weird one. On the prelims, Andre Petrosky, a self-knockout. He goes in for a takedown. His chin hits his opponent's hip. The takedown has failed, and then he stumbles in the center of the octagon and gets finished there.
Unbelievable. Absolutely amazing. One of the weirdest finishes to a fight you've ever seen.
The only thing I could think of that was this level of weird, Sam, when it comes to like a self-knockout in the UFC, I forget who it was, but there was one of the tough finale fights where somebody got a takedown on one of the fighters, hit his own head to knock himself unconscious, and the fighter who was taken down actually suffered a rib injury, not knowing the guy had just knocked himself unconscious and tapped out of the fight because of a rib injury. And so the fight ends up being,
that was like a Manny Gambarian fight or something.
yeah, and the fight ends up becoming a no contest.
Yeah, it was like Manny Gambarian versus Gray Maynard or something. It was something
I
weird.
think that's what it was. Yeah, it was a Gray Maynard fight.
Crazy.
One other thing before we go, Zan. So we obviously put boxing towards the bottom because we were like, it's the PBC and the Amazon and haha. And then Sebastian Fedor goes off and pulls off an upset. He defeats Tim Tszyu, wins the WBO and the vacant WBC welterweight titles. Super welterweight titles.
I love this fight.
I watched the highlights. Awesome. The highlights were fun.
This fight was awesome. This fight is what the PBC needed to get its legs under them on Amazon. This fight over delivered. I have no complaints. This was a great fight. Both guys are extremely tough, extremely durable, and the winner of Terrence Crawford and Frank Martin. Oh boy, they're gonna have their hands full. That's what I think. Sebastian Fedor fighting for a world title. On the biggest stage that the welterweight division can get, which is 168, which is 147 pounds, is going to be very, very interesting.
For sure. What do you think happens to Tszyu from here? Because there were all these talks about Tszyu moving up in weight. Does that still happen with this loss?
Yeah, or he could try to make a rematch possible, but I would say more than likely he'll move up in weight. Yeah, I would say so. He'll move up in weight. He'll fight someone international. Get his feet wet again and get a win. That's what I think.
I could see that because I know they had been talking, would Tszyu end up fighting Crawford? I'm like, well, that's not going to happen immediately now with a loss to Pandora.
Right.
All right. We're going to end here. I want to mention a programming, though. So Zan's going to be going on a big trip of his own very soon.
I sure will be. So in case you guys haven't already gotten the memo by now, I am going to the Final Four in Arizona. The matchups are set. We have UConn, Alabama, NC State, and Purdue. They're all going to be there to determine who's going to be the national champion for March Madness. You can catch those games this coming Saturday, and then obviously the championship game is Monday, April 8th, and I return to the Chicago suburbs on April 9th. So with that being said, with a star-studded week that it is going to be that week, Thursday, April 11th, is going to be it's going to be episode 79 of this coveted show where we will discuss everything that is related to the biggest card to date, which is going to be UFC 300, April 13th at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas.
For sure. And the MMA Outsiders is actually going to have additional programming in that weekend in the lead up to UFC 300. But for our main show purposes, us and the other show that I do with Nick Morgeson, Empty the Bench Sports, are going to be flip-flopping next week. So we will be on Thursday, April 11th, probably in ETV Sports' slot, which would be 3 p.m. Eastern, although that's still to be determined. And part of this, Zan, is also because there's going to be a double dosage of us two on that day. But I'm not going to say that out loud here. You're going to have to tune into ETV Sports this week to find out what that's all about.
Yeah, and once you guys find out what it is, it's going to change this current network format as you know it for probably the foreseeable future. So stay tuned for all of that excitement and so much more. Before we get out of here, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network on social media at ETB Network, as they're slowly but surely climbing towards the 1,000 subscriber mark. So every like and share across social media really does help us out and helps out the algorithm a ton. So we really appreciate that. Of course, you can follow our show at MMA Outsiders ETB, and then of course you can follow Tom and I's socials. They're scrolling across the bottom as well, and so much more. And of course, there it is. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/ETB Network. Of course, you could go to the blogs to check those out. There's so much incredible content coming out in regards to the NFL and Major League Baseball at the moment, and we're going to add some more sports in the fold here soon. And as we can make those announcements, we will let you know. Just a reminder, the MMA Outsiders is presented by Wolf Spreads. You guys know the deal with that is we like to reveal every single week, and we will be back for more than likely what will be the biggest episode of this show to date when we preview the all but encompassing UFC 300. It's gonna be exciting, isn't it?
Next week is going to be quite the exciting time for MMA. So enjoy everything that's going on this week, guys, in the sports world, whether it's, the fights, obviously, this weekend on Thursday and Saturday. WrestleMania for my fellow wrestling fans is this weekend. So, and then next weekend, of course, is the big UFC 300. So it's almost like, I think it was Sandu who said it. It's like Christmas time at this point for combat sports fans again.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, this is further down the road, but knock on wood, assuming nothing crazy happens, the following week after UFC 300 is going to all be about Devin Haney versus Ryan Garcia in Brooklyn, and so much other fun stuff to look forward to on the horizon. Spring is in full force, and summer is right around the corner, which is crazy to think about. So
Can't
there
wait.
you go. Absolutely.
So for Zan Bando, I'm Tom Albano. We'll see you next time here on the MMA Outsiders. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Take care. And just as a reminder, be Joe Piper and enjoy the fights from the UFC Apex this Saturday.
See you around.
See ya.